why did you create the programs?
I spent 30 years as a freelance photographer, and it was an up and down ride. It was being very busy shooting and not having any time to promote anything, not having any time to basically cover the paperwork that was needed. And then I would not be shooting, and I would have a lot of time to do the other part, which would make me busy again. I needed somebody or something that would handle my office for me. I was submitting pictures and I wasn't sending proper documentation with them, and pictures would get lost. I was submitting invoices, but because I wasn't sending monthly statements, I wasn't getting paid promptly.
Ouch.
Yeah. And I looked for other people's programs, and I couldn't find anything that was suited to the freelance photography life that I was living. There were studio management programs that were written for, or actually there was only one that was written for a studio manager in a completely different type of photography. And there were programs that were written for wedding photographers,
Right.
But not for the freelance photographer. So I wrote the program basically to take care of what I needed for my own business.
Right. So taking care of the back end part of the paperwork and the licenses and that stuff.
Yes, and keeping track of where the money came from, what I was spending money on, and where the money came from. Also, the reason I wrote the program is I started this when things were just beginning to go digital in the 90s.
Okay.
And I would go to ASMP meetings and other professional meetings, and the photographers were terrified. They were afraid that because digital was easy, that all of their income was going to go away. And ASMP at the time had written a book on pricing, but they hadn't updated it in years. And there was no real way for photographers to communicate with each other. They were all frightened of where the industry was heading, and they weren't talking to each other about it. They were all very much in competition.
Yeah, that must have been a time of a lot of upheaval, like in the industry as digital was coming in with so many unknowns.
Everything was unknown. The people who were inventing the digital didn't know what was going to happen. It was just happening, and it was still an odd mixture of film and digital. And the big problem was that photographers weren't talking to each other about pricing. So I had the idea of writing a pricing program, PhotoQuote, to see if photographers would talk to me if I kept the information private, if I didn't say where it was coming from or didn't say who their clients were, but insisted that they give me accurate information about what they were getting, what they were charging, and how they were working. And that's how PhotoQuote started.
Nice.
I was able to get a one-stock agency that handled a lot of book contracts and record albums to send me the invoices. They FedExed me invoices that I could see. I was in an agency in Los Angeles, and a friend of mine in that agency was one of their top photographers, and he would get sales records an inch thick of stack of paper, and I was able to check and see that every category that I had to check against actual sales records.
Perfect.
And I had photographers all over the country sharing things, and then after a while, I would call and say, how much are you charging for this? And they'd come back and tell me how much, and I'd say, well, where did you get that? And they'd say, I looked it up in your program. But what proved over time was that photographers were getting, to a great extent, what we were quoting. We put in there the ability to adjust for things like if you're in a small town, you're not going to get New York prices. But our things weren't New York prices either. They were prices from photographers all over the United States, and then eventually all over Canada, and then we got popular in Australia as well. And we were selling quite a few programs to people there, and those people then became available for us to query about what they were getting paid.
Nice. So ultimately, have the programs solve for you what the issues were about your time and spending time in front of the camera or in front of the computer versus...
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
I wish I could throw Photoshop and Lightroom away and just use my programs, because it's so much more useful and so much more helpful.